Hi, good afternoon, good morning. Today we're going to continue talking about love, but before, if there is a Nadia in this room and you left a keychain in class, we have it here, so please come and see me afterwards. So let's talk about love. Last time we left off with more questions than answers. The question was, difficult question, was how can we sustain love? How can we sustain passion beyond the honeymoon phase? Because even if we did have our Brad Pitt or Halle Berry, that does not guarantee lasting passion. In fact, what we know that it does guarantee over time is a waning of the physiological excitement that we experience when we are with that person. And that in part explains some of the statistics, such as 2/3 of marriages end up in divorce, such as even those who do stay together. After a while, it's out of convenience, out of a sense of duty, and not always, or more often than not, does not have the same sense of togetherness, of passion that existed at the beginning of the relationship, when there were all the good intentions and the hope of a lifelong, committed relationship, marriage or otherwise. And then we asked what positive psychology can do for us. We asked the additional question to the normal question that has been asked for many years, which is, why do so many relationships fail? It's an important question. It's necessary. It's very far from being sufficient. And it leads to the same errors, to the same shortcomings that asking only the negative question leads to when we're studying at-risk youth, when we're studying time management and stress. Because when we only ask one of the questions, what we're missing are the children on the bus, metaphorically speaking. What we're missing are the colors in the reality in front of us. If the only question that we focus on is how many geometric shapes are there. Questions create reality. And very often, if we don't ask a certain question, certain answers are obscured and disappear. So we asked this question, and we asked not just about what makes relationships work, but what makes relationships thrive. And psychologists such as David Schnarch and John Gottman, in their extraordinary books, extraordinary research, talk about some of these characteristics. So let's get into them. The first one is about working hard. This is the world's best kept secret. It's the secret of success. It's the secret of personal success, of successful relationships. There are no shortcuts. If we want a relationship to thrive, to succeed, we need to put a lot of work in it. Now, that seems self-evident, obvious, common sense. But so often in this class we have seen what Voltaire has remarked, that common sense is not that common. Now, why is common sense not that common when it applies to working hard in a relationship? The reason is because many people have wrong expectations of the relationship or of what it means to have a happy relationship. Specifically, most people believe that the most important part of enjoying a happy, lifelong, committed relationship is finding the right partner. And that's certainly important, but it is a mistake to focus on finding. People have, if we draw an analogy to Carol Dweck's research on fixed versus malleable mindset. People have a finding mindset that hurts the relationship. Let me explain. So going back, this we did before spring break, what Carol Dweck showed was that when we praise people for their intelligence, oh, you're so smart after doing well on a test, they enter a fixed mindset. Versus if we praise them for, oh, you've worked so hard, they have a malleable mindset. And that has consequences, because the fixed mindset, the intelligence, you're so smart, doesn't help them much. And then when they go to the next puzzle, next task, which is difficult, that threatens their schema. Oh, if I don't get it, if I don't succeed, it means that I'm no longer smart. And they give up more easily, they're more threatened by failure, and they don't enjoy the process. They become perfectionists, or more likely to become perfectionists. Okay, so this is the fixed mindset. You're so smart, you're so intelligent. The malleable mindset, oh, you worked so hard, oh, I can work with that. So even if I don't succeed and don't do well, I can still learn, and I do learn to enjoy the process more. So that's the malleable mindset. Now let's draw an analogy to what I've just discussed here. If I believe that the most important thing about enjoying a lifelong, committed, happy relationship is finding the right partner, I enter what I call, again, by analogy, the finding mindset, which would be equivalent to Dweck's fixed mindset. And then let's say I have this mindset, this is the most important thing, and then we go through a rough patch in our relationship. Then what happens? Then I begin to think, wait a minute, something's wrong here. I must have not found the right partner. I must have made a mistake, an error of judgment. And that very often leads to a worsening of the situation, and it can, doesn't always, but can lead to a downward spiral. This is the finding mindset, because it's fixed. I found my knight in shining armor. I found my dream woman. I found my Brad Pitt, my Halle Berry. And you know, the problem is that reality inevitably hits. We can't run away from it. And reality dictates that there are no perfect relationships. Remember the Leo Buscaglia quote about perfect love is rare indeed. No, it's not rare. It doesn't exist. And when we realize that, if we have the finding mindset, the fixed mindset, it threatens our schema. There is inconsistency, and then we begin to think, well, I probably did not find the right person. In contrast, if we have the cultivating mindset, that's malleable. That's related to the effort part. Okay, so we're going through a hardship, we're going through a difficulty, but it's okay because we're working on it. We're working to resolve it. It's like the students who were praised for their effort. Okay, so I'm not solving this puzzle now, but so what? I'm putting in a lot of effort, I'm trying, I'm even enjoying the process. Look at the direct parallel here between Dweck's work on mindset and our mindset when it comes to relationships. So important, makes such a big difference. And very often we can switch it, if not immediately, relatively promptly. Remember, Carol Dweck was able to change the mindset of people in a single experiment, in a few hours. And we can do the same in a relationship if we truly accept and internalize the fact that relationships, while finding the right partner, a good partner, is of course important. It is much more important to then cultivate that relationship. And we'll get to that in a minute. But the question then arises, so why do people have the finding mindset? Why do people have or not have the cultivating mindset if it is healthier? One of the main reasons are the movies. Now, movies are wonderful. They're terrific. They show us what is possible. You know, Aristotle once said about art that it's, or about fiction, that it's more important than history because history depicts things as they are, whereas fiction depicts things as they can and ought to be. So it's a wonderful thing to show us a model of what's possible, especially the romantic movies. And I don't mean romantic in terms of love, romantic in the 18th, 19th century sense of romantic, showing us how things can work, how things can become, the potential of human nature, of relationships, of our world. So it's a wonderful thing, but one thing that movies don't do well is that they focus on the finding of the right partner, and hence very often reinforce the finding mindset. Because most of the movies, love stories look like this. There are struggles, there are fights, there are disagreements, there are challenges on the way, and then at the end, Mr. and Mrs. Smith get together and they live happily ever after. The screen drops and they walk into the sunset. You know what the problem is with that picture? The problem is that movies end where love begins. It is after the screen drops that the actual work starts. It is easy. It is easy to have a good relationship at the beginning, the honeymoon phase, or through the first year or two, usually. But then what happens after a while when the initial physiological instinct wanes? What happens when we start to recognize and understand and realize and see that, well, this partner is not perfect? What happens then? Well, that's when true love begins, and that's where true love is cultivated and formed. Now, I'm not belittling the importance of finding a partner, the right person for us. It is, of course, important. And often it takes kissing many frogs before we find our prince. But the more important part of a thriving long-term relationship is the cultivation. This is where the effort starts. It's after the sun sets that difficulties and hardships rise. Now, connected to this mindset, is the notion that there is only one right person for us. And all I need to do, and all I need to dedicate all my effort and time to, is find that right person. And if I have to go all the way to Yale, I'll go there to find that person. The modern version of a Shakespearean tragedy, perhaps. Whatever I need to do, I will do it just to find that one right person, even if I'm in Boston and they're in Seattle. I will find that right person. I don't believe that. It's simply not true. It's not a matter of faith. I mean, we know of many people who thought they found the right person, maybe did find the right person, and then either for tragic reasons or for good reasons they were no longer together, and they found more love. There are 6 billion people in the world. There's more than one right person. So what makes a relationship unique? It's not finding that one right person. Once again, it's cultivating that one chosen relationship. It's by virtue of working together, of being together, of spending time together, of dedicating one another. That's how we create the one chosen relationship, one special relationship. That's how two separate I's become a we. And again, to do that, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't even happen in a year or two. It takes time. In fact, it doesn't happen. It is happening. It's a process. It's not about success in a relationship. It's about succeeding in a relationship. We cultivate a relationship not just simply by putting on the ring or by giving the vows. It's by doing things together. Why is that so important? Let me draw on some research from other areas of psychology. And this is something that I've mentioned on a couple of occasions. Some of the most important work done by Muzaffar Sharif back in the 1950s. And until Muzaffar Sharif came along, as I mentioned before, the hypothesis that people had when it comes to resolving interpersonal conflicts or intergroup conflicts, the belief that people had was that all you need to do was get the conflicting sides together. The dominant hypothesis was what's called the contact hypothesis. Get the two conflicting sides in touch with one another, whether it's conflicting ethnic groups, whether it's conflicting individuals, get them together and you will resolve the conflict. This was much of the work done by Gordon Elport in our department here back in the 1930s. Muzaffar Sharif comes along and shows that that's not the case. In fact, just bringing them together, just the contact of the conflicting sides, very often, more often than not, intensifies the conflict rather than resolves it. And I gave this in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict, where people just got together and the hope was that we'll have peace in our time. And instead, we got more war in our time. Contact is not enough. Not when it comes to bringing nations together, not when it comes to bringing ethnic groups together, and not when it comes to bringing a couple together. You see, in a relationship, inevitably, there are conflicts. Inevitably. There is no perfect relationship, and if there were a perfect relationship, it would not be a conflict-free relationship, as we'll see shortly. So there are conflicts in a relationship, whether it's during the first year or whether it's after 2 or 3 years, and serious conflicts. I'm not just saying about, a conflict about, well, you should put down the toilet seat or keep it up. I mean serious, well, that could be serious, I guess. But other serious conflicts. And when there is conflict and all the couples are doing together is simply being together, in touch with one another, that's not enough to resolve that conflict. And very often it will start as a minor conflict and then get worse, spiral up, or rather spiral down over time. So what does Sharif say, and what do we know today? That the important thing in resolving conflicts is having a superordinate goal. When the two ethnic groups, when the two nations work together and are interdependent, whether it's in business or in a relationship, it could be raising children, but doing the things together, or belonging to the same political campaign, or opposite political campaigns, that's fine, but working together, supporting one another. And when you have the working together, the doing together, that's when you're most likely to resolve the conflicts. And in fact, these conflicts, as we'll see shortly, can make the relationship even stronger. What the couple need are mutually meaningful goals. And again, it could be having children together and raising the children together. Not just, okay, well, we had the child and then, the mother or the father raised the kid, more often the mother. And, okay, so we did something together. No. The kid has to be, to put it in very, very delicate and I'm sure appropriate terms, the kid has to be a joint venture. Isn't that a lovely term to describe having kids? As long as they don't bring any bad debt, or, that there is good return on investment. Yeah, that's just the right language there. Took me a while to think about it. So, working together, bringing the kids up together, or being on campaigns together, or helping one another at work, but doing things together. John Gottman: in the strongest marriages, husband and wife share a deep sense of meaning. They don't just get along. They also support each other's hopes and aspirations and build a sense of purpose into their lives together. That doesn't mean that they need to do everything together, and it's okay for one to have his or her own meaningful goals at work where they don't work together. That's perfectly fine. But in addition, there have to be things that are done together. In other words, what they need is an active kind of love. You know, the first time I really understood the meaning of active love was through a story that Shahar, who's one of my best friends in Israel, told me. We were in the same class, but he got married at a relatively young age. He was in his early 20s, and had his first kid soon after. And he's very introspective, very honest, high levels of integrity. And he told me that at the beginning, when he had Noam, when Noam came home from hospital with his wife, with his mom, Shahar didn't really feel love toward Noam. It was very cute, adorable, but he didn't feel a strong sense of love that he thought he should have felt. Needless to say, he felt enormously guilty about it. That didn't last for long, fortunately, because as soon as Shahar started taking care of Noam, which meant changing his diapers, which meant getting up in the middle of the night and feeding him, which meant taking him for walks, which meant cleaning after him, that's when the love was cultivated. That's when he started to feel a deep sense of fatherhood for the first time. So it wasn't natural. For some people it is natural. For women more often, but not always. More often than men. So we can rely and wait for this natural thing to happen, or we can actively engage in activities that show, that illustrate our love. And remember self-perception theory. We very often form theories and beliefs about ourselves based on how we behave. So the examples we used in the past, if I see myself going up to someone and asking them out, even if they say no, I perceive myself as someone with confidence, and my self-esteem will go up, regardless of the response. If I see myself trying out for plays, I will perceive myself as someone courageous. If I perceive myself as, if I take care of myself, I'll see myself as someone with self-esteem who cares about him or herself. So the same with children. If I see myself taking care of my child, my conclusion in self-perception theory is, oh, I must love that child. And that love actually intensifies over time, whether it's with children, whether it's with partners. We may experience the love automatically at the beginning. It could be love at first sight. However, if we don't sustain the active love, over time, because of self-perception theory, over time that will go away. Because if I don't invest anything in the relationship, self-perception theory, oh, it must not be that important for you. And then the love wanes. Not to mention all the physiological reasons why it wanes over time. So if there isn't the active love, it cannot be sustained. How do we sustain love? How do we remain active? Relationships, rituals. Now, when we talked about rituals, I told you about the rituals that my wife and I have. 2 dates a week. Meals with the whole family. Additional, at least once a week. Usually it's 3 or 4 times a week. But we have these rituals. Because without rituals, in our modern world, the important yet not urgent, in the words of Stephen Covey, the important yet not urgent activities will take a back seat. So yeah, we know it's important to go on dates, but it's not as urgent as a phone call that I just received from work and I have to wait or stay at work. Whereas if it's a ritual, if we do it no matter what, then it will sustain itself. The second way, and extremely important way of sustaining love, is making that shift from the desire to be validated to the desire to be known. This advice that I got from David Schnark in his book Passionate Marriage, this single advice has quite literally transformed my relationships. Whether it's my romantic relationship with my wife, or my relationship with my friends, family members, as well as students. And I've mentioned this before, and I want to go into more depth here, because it is so crucial for sustaining passion, for sustaining friendship, for sustaining happiness, individual, intrapersonal, as well as interpersonal happiness. So what does that mean? What does being known rather than being validated mean? First of all, one thing that David Schnark and others have shown is that if we want to sustain passion beyond the honeymoon phase, beyond the time when it's automatic, what we need to do is form deeper levels of intimacy. And couples, again, now we're studying the couples who have been together for 20, 30, 40 years and still have a passionate relationship. Couples who do that, the tip of the stem, unfortunately, but couples who do that have cultivated and continue to cultivate, not find, cultivate intimacy throughout their lives. And how do you cultivate intimacy? By getting to know one another more and more and more, more deeply, more meaningfully, by understanding one another, by getting to know one another as we know ourselves. And that means that if we are up to be known by the other partner, that means we must open up. That means we must reveal. That means we need to share of ourselves. Not just the wonderful and the amazing and the terrific things that we share on the first date. That too. But in addition, also the things that sometimes we're not that proud of. Our weaknesses, perhaps. Some of the things that maybe we're ashamed of, that we don't feel very comfortable revealing, that no one knows about us. Now, that does not happen on the first date. It shouldn't happen on the first date. Very often it doesn't happen after 5 or 10 years. It happens gradually over time as trust increases. And we reveal more and more. Sometimes we reveal things about ourselves that we didn't even know existed, that we repressed or suppressed over time. But it takes time, which is why, going back to David Schnark's quote about cellulites and sexual potential, that usually happens after 10, 20, 30, and which is why at the age of 50 and 60, there is even better sexual potential than at the age of 18 or 20 or 30. Doesn't mean it can be great at 18, 20, and 30. But it can be even greater. Why? Because deeper levels of intimacy, deeper level of connectedness. A lot to look forward to if we understand what is the nature of a passionate relationship. It cannot just rely on, well, we came together, I found my prince, princess charming, and then we'll live happily ever after. No, it means also taking risks at times. It means revealing over time our deepest desires, our deepest fantasies, our greatest strengths, as well as our weaknesses, our insecurities, and our passions. That's what it means to be revealed, to open up, to share. What it means is that a healthy relationship is about expressing ourselves rather than trying to constantly impress. This is the difference between being known, express, versus being validated. Let me impress her. Let me impress him. Let me impress them. The thing about this is that, yes, it is more risky to open up, to express ourselves, because what if she doesn't like me? What if he doesn't like what he finds out about me? But you see, when we express, we're more likely to have a thriving relationship. It's not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. It's not guaranteed. However, if we just impress, we are guaranteed failure. Here is why. First of all, when we express, generally, over time, maybe not in the short term, but over time, people will be more attracted to us. Specifically, my partner will like me even more over time because there are deeper levels of intimacy, even if they sometimes find out things that they don't necessarily like or adore or appreciate. Over time, it's people who are genuine who attract other people. And by the way, this applies in the realm, of course, of interpersonal romantic relationships. It applies in the realm of friendships, and it applies in the realm of leadership. The greatest leaders, as Peter Drucker has illustrated, are not the people who are the most charismatic. They're not the people who are the most engaging. They're the people who have the highest levels of integrity. These are the leaders whom followers follow over time in the long term. So whether it's interpersonal group relationships or individual relationships, when we express ourselves, we're much more likely to thrive. The second thing, though, that's important to keep in mind is that, let's say I impress and I do such a good job of it that the other person or the other group actually likes me. It worked. I won. Well, have I? Who do they really like? Do they like me? Or do they like that image, that facade that I put on? In other words, it's not me that they really like. And it may look like it, but it's pretense, it's make-believe. It's not the real thing. In other words, I lose. And it certainly cannot sustain itself over time. So we have more likelihood of succeeding when we express, and zero likelihood of succeeding in the long term when our primary objective is impress. Now, this does not mean going on a first date and not trying to impress. I mean, I've not met anyone who has not tried to impress on a first day or a 10th or after 10 years. That's okay. However, what is the primary motivator in our time being together? Just like we reveal, we open up, and we share, we also need to get and make an active effort to get to know our partner, to know what their favorite wine is, what their favorite flowers are, where they like to be tickled, where they like to be touched. What are their fears? What are their desires? When is a good time to maybe give them their own space? When is a good time to talk to them? When is a good time to touch them? And all these things take time. It doesn't happen on the first date. It doesn't happen in the first year. And it doesn't all happen in the first 10 years or 30 years. That's what it means to create a lifelong, thriving relationship, that we get to know the other person throughout our lives. My grandfather and grandmother, my role models when it comes to relationship, got to know each other deeper and better after 50 years as well. They did not thrive, they were thriving. They did not succeed, they were succeeding, growing together. David Schnark, intimacy is about letting yourself really be known, including parts that you or your partner don't like. But it's not just about letting warts be known. It often involves showing strengths you've been hiding too. Most approaches focus on getting your partner's validation and acceptance when you disclose. But you can't count on this. And if you try, it inherently limits self-disclosure because you won't say things your partner won't validate. Resolving gridlock requires intimacy based on validating yourself. Many, if not most, couples counselors, sex therapists, believe that the most important thing in a relationship, in a healthy long-term relationship, is that the partners validate one another. And that is important. Of course I want to be validated by my partner. Of course I validate my partner. However, that's not the foundation of a healthy relationship. And this is where most therapists, most couples are wrong. This is where I was wrong. Not understanding that the foundation is to be known. whether it's in a romantic relationship or a relationship with friends. You see, when you disclose, you are taking a risk. And very often it leads to a conflict, a disagreement, dis-ease in the relationship. However, usually, not always, but usually that is a temporary dis-ease. On the other hand, if you disclose over time and you open up and you share, that's when you lead to long-lasting positive consequences to the relationship. So on the one hand, when you disclose, it's uncomfortable by definition. If it was comfortable, then it wouldn't be hard, wouldn't be real disclosure. It's difficult in the short term, but in the long term, it leads to growth. So the question is, what do you want? Do you want a temporary feeling good, oh, you're validated, you're wonderful, and let me impress and show you how terrific I am, because it feels good to be validated? Or are you looking for long-term, thriving interpersonal friendships or romantic relationships? That is the question. Now, I said earlier, and I spoke about it a couple of months ago, I want to repeat it, how it changed my relationship with my students, how it changed, transformed my teaching. Because when I started to teach, my main goal, whether it was explicit, and at times it was explicit, but mostly on the subconscious level, was to be validated. I really wanted my students to like me. That was my primary goal, my primary objective. Over time, as I read Schnarch specifically, as well as looking at other people's work, such as Parker Palmer's The Courage to Teach, my objective changed to be known. This is my mantra now. Every day before I stand here and talk to you, every single day, I think about and read my mantra. In fact, on the first page of my notes, these are my notes, my cheat sheet. On the top, be known. Every day, to be known, rather than to be validated. That has transformed my relationship with my students and my teaching for various reasons. First of all, it's so stressful, enervating, to think constantly I have to impress, whether it's my romantic partner or 650 or 1,000 students. It's difficult. There's a lot of pressure there. It is much easier to stand up here and say, okay, what I want the students to do is to get to know me better. And that means to get to know the field that I'm so passionate and so caring about. I want them to know me better. So I feel so much lighter about it. I feel so much lighter about it in my interaction with Tommy, when it's about being known rather than impressing, rather than being validated. That's the first important thing. The second thing about trying to impress constantly is that we put on a facade, an act, and then I tried, if I want to be validated constantly, to seem perfect so that the students really like me and approve of me. But then what I'm doing is I'm hurting the students as well, because if I'm good at it, if I'm good at putting up the facade and depicting this perfect teacher, I'm being a terrible role model, which in the long term will only hurt the students. Because that thing doesn't exist. And if anyone aspires to this perfection, whether in a relationship, whether on the individual level, it inevitably is a prescription for perfectionism, hence for failure, hence for unhappiness. Whereas if I'm here to be known, which means my weaknesses, my failures, whether it's my failure in Cambridge, my failure here, whether it's the anxiety, then you see a real person. Whether it's the mistakes, you see a real person. And that's a much better teacher, much more accessible, I hope, than the facade perfect who is there about to be validated. And again, beyond the fact that it's so much more fun for me being here, because what I'm doing now is sharing with you. Obviously, I'm sharing parts of myself with you, and I'm sharing the field that I'm so passionate about and care about so much. To be known rather than to be validated. Easier said than done. But the benefits, especially the long-term benefits, are immense. absolutely immense. The third point is about allowing for conflict in a relationship. You see, one of the misunderstandings about healthy relationships is that those relationships don't have conflict. They don't fight. The gold standard is a conflict-free relationship. And that's a serious misunderstanding. John Gottman has done a lot of work in this area. One of the things that he showed was that there is no one right relationship, and that also means that different relationships look differently from outside or from the inside. Some relationships thrive and are very quiet. Some relationships thrive and are extremely volatile. Both can succeed. There is no one right form of relationship, and there are numerous permutations and variations on this. But while there is no one right relationship, one thing that Gottman has found is that in all those relationships, whether they're volatile or very peaceful and quiet or somewhere in between, they all have conflicts. And on average, and this is an average because it can be 10 to 1, it can also be 3 to 1. But on average, they have one conflict for each 5 positive interactions. Now, that doesn't mean now going home and telling your partner, we've already had 7 good interactions, let's fight. Certainly not that. But that is what he has seen when he studied hundreds and thousands of thriving couples. That was more or less the average of conflict per positive interactions. This statistic, by the way, helped me a lot, because whenever Tommy and I used to fight, and yes, we do fight at times, I used to say, oh, what's wrong? Versus now I say, okay, it's natural. Let's see how we can resolve it, what we can learn from it, how we can grow from it. That doesn't mean I enjoy or that we seek conflict. It's awful, and sometimes it hurts very deeply. But at the same time, to understand it's natural. And just like we give ourselves the permission to be human on an individual level, it's important that we give our relationship the permission to be human and humane. People who have that 5 to 1 ratio, again, more or less, usually have the thriving relationship. People who have a lot less than 1 to 5 ratio, meaning 100 to 1, the relationship in the long term does not thrive, nor do people who have many more conflicts than positive interactions. So neither extremes are good. The importance of conflict is that it immunizes. Let's look at the natural or physiological level of immunity. What would happen to a person was just born and put into an oxygen tank, which is sterilized, and not taken out of that sterilized oxygen tank? What will happen if, say, after 2 years or 3 years or 10 years, that baby, now no longer a baby, is taken out of that perfect surrounding into the real world? That person is very likely to get ill, very likely to get seriously ill. Why? Because it's not healthy to be in a sterilized environment on the physiological level. Because every time you get ill or every time you're exposed to pollutions or bacteria, your body actually strengthens. The same in a relationship. If you're not exposed to conflict in a relationship, over time, the relationship will not strengthen. It will be weak. It will be unable to sustain the inevitable conflict that will arise. So conflict immunizes. It's important. And we'll talk about in what ways or what the conflict looks like, because not every conflict is healthy. The key that Gottman talks about is not to take away or eliminate the negative, but rather to accentuate, to strengthen the positive. So in relationships that don't thrive, where there's too much fighting, relationships that are here, just accentuate the positive. If you're here and there are no conflicts, well, that means maybe that we're suppressing things, emotions, disagreements. In other words, we're not about being known, and we need to move on and reveal ourselves, open up, and share. Here are some ways of accentuating the positive. So you remember in the book in Happier, I talk about happiness boosters. These are mini activities. Could be anywhere from a minute to 3 hours of doing things that are both meaningful and pleasurable to us. So just like we have happiness boosters that can have a trickle effect for the rest of our lives, we can also have love boosters. There's a story about Albert Einstein and Ludwig van der Rohe. Ludwig van der Rohe was one of the founders of quantum physics. And when Ludwig van der Rohe wrote Einstein a letter saying to him, you know, I want to interest you in this new fascinating field of quantum physics. I want your support. Einstein was, you know, a big shot at the time. Einstein responded with a letter, and in the letter said to Ludwig van der Rohe, I'm not interested in quantum physics. What I'm interested in I'm not interested in the details. What I am interested in is what God thought about when he created the world. I'm not interested in the details. I'm interested in what God thought about when he created the world. To which Ludwig van der Rohe wrote back saying, God is in the details. The same with love. Love is in the details. Love is not in that 1 week or 2 months around the world cruise. Love is not in that 5-carat diamond ring. Yes, these things are wonderful. They certainly lead to a spike in well-being, sometimes to a spike in love. But they're not what sustains a happy relationship. What sustains a happy relationship are the details, the little things, the day-to-day rituals, the touch, the gaze, the meal together. Mini love boosters also sustain. I got this idea from Peter Frankel, who is from the Ackerman Family Center in New York. And what he talks about are 60 seconds pleasure points throughout the day, whether it's a passionate kiss, whether it's just a hug where you just hold one another, whether it's just sending a text message to your partner saying how much you love them and miss them. The little things. And what they found was that these little things made the big difference. Again, yes, the big things also make a difference, and I'm not belittling them. But that just leads to a spark. To sustain happiness, it takes time, and it takes work. It takes commitment. A relationship is made extraordinary by focusing on these details, on these day-to-day activities. And how we do that, we demonstrate interest by asking, so, how was your day, sweetheart? Or, tell me more about what you have just done. Or, what have you been thinking? Or, you know, you look a little bit down. Anything I can do? Demonstrate interest. Create love maps. Get to know the other person. What they like, what they don't like, and how they like it. Again, the little things, such as touching, such as smiling, such as flowers, such as remembering the important dates, men. Today it's much easier, you know, we have the computer reminding us. Have many reminders. Talking from personal experience. Pay compliments. Pay compliments to your partner. You know, don't take for granted. Remember the word appreciate. 2 meanings. To pay a compliment to someone. Oh, you look wonderful. Oh, this was so great. Thank you so much for doing. Thank you for thinking of me. Paying compliments, appreciating, makes the good appreciate. And when we don't appreciate, when we don't pay compliments, the good depreciates. Mark Twain. I can live for 2 months on a good compliment. Don't take him literally, though. Let me share with you a story. This is my father-in-law and his wife. My father-in-law is a graduate of Harvard Law School, very bright, very smart, and married to, his name is Ami, married to a lovely woman, Rachel. And they went on a date. And Rachel was wearing a beautiful dress. And they walked into the party and they spent the whole night and they saw many people. It was a lovely evening. And at the end of the evening, they went back home. And Rachel asked Ami, she said, Ami, the whole night I've been getting compliments about how wonderful I look, how ravishing the dress is, how radiant I look. I got it from everyone except from you. Now remember, Ami is a Harvard Law School graduate, very smart, very quick on his feet, one of the leading lawyers in Israel. So he said, Rachel, do you remember when a couple of months ago I told you how beautiful, how gorgeous you were? And she said, yes, of course I remember. He said, well, until further notice, you're beautiful. Now, that almost worked. The problem is that Rachel is also a lawyer. Very bright, very successful. And she said to him, Ami, sweetheart, until further notice, you're on the couch. So, don't wait to be asked to give compliments. Give it, it's free. And yet, though it's free, in the ultimate currency, it is invaluable. Invaluable, because we get so much out of it, the giver as well as the receiver. You know that the number one predictor of therapeutic relationships, the number one predictor of the success of a therapy, of a psychologist or a social worker or a psychiatrist, is empathy. How well you're able to understand, to empathize, to identify with your client. It's no different in romantic relationships. Do I really listen to my partner? Do I really look at my partner? Do I demonstrate genuine interest in what my partner is doing, feeling, and how they are? Do I really, really want to get to know them? Because if we don't have that, it is very difficult to sustain a long-term, thriving relationship. And finally, sex is important for long-term, thriving relationship. It does not have to come before marriage. It does not have to come before there is a lifelong commitment, marriage or other. It can, it often does in our world. And either way is fine, either choice. However, for the long-term success of the relationship, it is also important to have the physical aspect. It's very rare, it exists, but it's very rare to have a romantic relationship without the physical component. Because that's one of the distinguishing characteristics between that and a deep friendship, for example. Love at its, or rather sex at its highest, is love made concrete. Love made concrete. That is why we talk about making love. It's the concretization of that emotion, of that abstract notion. The important thing here is, as in every other area of the relationship, healthy communication. Because very often we reveal ourselves, we share of ourselves in the bedroom more than in any other place, whether it's physically or emotionally or cognitively. That's where we open up. That's when we are literally, metaphorically naked. And communication is important because very often there are differences in expectations. And there is no one right prescription here. Okay, sex 5 times a week, the best relationships, 3 not bad, 1 okay. No, there are fantastic relationships where it's, once a day or twice a month, or once a week. They're wonderful relationship whether it's every day 3 times. There is no one right prescription. I don't know what I said that was funny, but I'll have to watch it after because I'm sure Freud is watching now. And the important thing is to communicate, because it is a source of conflict. It is a potential source of conflict. It doesn't have to be. Let me show you a quick video, just to get the attention off me for a minute, from Woody Allen.
That day in Brooklyn was the last day I remember really having a good time.
We never have any laughs anymore is the problem.
I've been moody and dissatisfied.
How often do you sleep together?
Do you have sex often?
Hardly ever, maybe 3 times a week.
Constantly. I'd say 3 times a week. Like the other night, Albie wanted to have sex.
She would not sleep with me the other night, It's just...
And I don't know, 6 months ago, I would have done it. I would have done it, just
incredible.
to please her.
I tried everything, I put on soft music and my red light bulb.
But the thing is, since our discussions here, I feel I have a right to my own feelings. I think you would have been happy because I really asserted myself.
The incredible thing about it is I'm paying for her analysis and she's making progress and I'm getting screwed.
I don't know, though. I feel so guilty because Albie is paying for it. So, so I do feel guilty if I don't go to bed with him. But if I do go to bed with him, it's like I'm going against my own feelings.
She's making progress and I'm not making any progress.
I can't win.
Then her progress is killing my progress.
Sometimes I think I should just live with a woman.
So hardly ever 3 times a week, constantly 3 times a week. Again, different perceptions. Communication is important. Not any conflict is good. There is positive as well as negative conflict. Helpful research in this area comes actually from organizational behavior. Specifically, what research in organizational behavior shows is that healthy intergroup or intra-group conflict is cognitive conflict rather than affective conflict. Cognitive conflict is about focusing on the person's behavior or thoughts and ideas and challenging those. Unhealthy conflict is focusing on the person, on their emotions, on who they are. And when I attack someone for who they are, the person, their emotion, that is not healthy. Not for a group, not for couples. At the same time, I can disagree, we can have conflict when we focus on the ideas, the thoughts, and the behavior. Let me show you an example. Here is an example of focusing on the person. You're so inconsiderate. This is not the behavior, this is the person. Focusing on the behavior. Do you mind putting down the toilet seat when you're done? It may be as a result of the same thing. You didn't put the toilet seat down. One response, you're so inconsiderate, that's the person, versus the behavior. Another example. You're such a slob. You promised to throw away the garbage. I can't trust you. That is an attack on the person. Yeah, I think so. Versus, it upsets me to return to a dirty home after we agreed that you would throw away the garbage. Same event, very different approach, very different results to these criticisms. In addition to challenging behavior rather than person, it is important to avoid hostility, insults, and contempt. John Gottman talks about this a lot in his research, and he says that he can predict divorce with 94% accuracy. as I mentioned last time, unheard of in the social sciences. And he can do it based on whether he sees in the disagreements, in the conflicts, and he asks the partners to describe their conflicts, and very often they start fighting as he observes them. When there is hostility, when there is contempt, very often that is a bad sign. Doesn't always lead to divorce, certainly not, but it's a bad sign. It's a bad sign in terms of the long-term likelihood of success, but it's also a bad sign in terms of the current enjoyment of the relationship. So it's important to keep these insults away, to focus on the person, to validate the person, to appreciate the person, and then to disagree with the behavior or with the ideas and the thinking. The key is to keep these disputes private, meaning it is difficult enough to fight in a relationship. It is extraordinarily difficult when embarrassment is also associated with it. So couples who shout at one another when they're with others, or when they show contempt when other friends are there, that is extremely destructive, extremely unhelpful. So to keep these intimate moments that can potentially lead to growth private. Finally, we can learn a lot from conflicts in gay couples. As I mentioned last time, John Gottman has studied gay couples a great deal, and one of the interesting things that he found was that they fight differently. Now, the interesting thing here, it would not have been interesting if that was just between women. The interesting thing is that he found it also between men, because women generally are better at fights than men. And there is actually a physiological reason for it. There's a physiological reason, because men, when they're attacked, for example, or when they feel attacked or threatened or disapproved of, actually have a much more powerful physiological response to it. Which is why men are more likely, for example, to switch off. It's not just because they're men. It's because there are real physiological differences there. Where a woman, for example, who is criticized will feel it. No one enjoys it. But a man, again, these are all averages. It doesn't mean all men or all women. But on average, men will feel it in a much more intense way, and then will try to protect themselves. And one of the way of protecting ourselves is by switching off, avoiding rather than coping. Whereas women are much more comfortable. Even on the physiological level, I'm not talking about the interpretation of that physiology, but on the physiological level, they are much more comfortable handling and dealing with this dis-ease or discomfort of an argument. So the first thing is to know it. Whether you're a man and you understand, well, I shouldn't switch off. I know I'm uncomfortable. It's part of my nature. Accept it. And then you can cope rather than avoid. Or with women, to have more empathy and understand that their partner's experience is not the same as their experience. But here is the interesting thing. In gay couples, men or women, we see a better ability to disagree. For example, how do they do it? First thing, more positive, more humor, more affection, more touching, whether it's the men or the women. And that helps to dissolve, to relax some of the tension that exists. Again, both for men and for women couples. The negativity is less often taken personally. So even if there is a serious disagreement, well, I understand that this is part of growth. This is important to keep in mind. That yes, we may not be enjoying ourselves now and it's a serious fight, but what can I learn from it? What are we going to learn? How are we going to grow? Because I understand that conflict is a natural, inevitable, important part of a relationship. Gay couples do it more. No reason why heterosexual couples can't do it more. Simply by reminding. And finally, there's more attention to the other side, to calm down, to understand, to be empathic, whether it's men or women, to be empathic and understand and soothe And very often just, in the middle of a conflict, saying something like, I'm sorry, or just a hug, or, it hurts me, and I love you so much. Just ways of soothing, alleviating some of the pressure in the conflict, because conflicts are not easy. Certainly not easy for gay couples either. It's just being able to manage a conflict when it occurs. It does not need to be peculiar to same-sex relationships. We know the golden rule, do not do unto others what you would not have done unto yourself. We talked about the platinum rule, do not do unto yourself what you would not do unto others, when we talked about perfectionism and the permission to be human. So here is the titanium rule. Do not do unto those close to you what you would not have done unto others who are not so close to you. How often in the street or when you've just met someone do you shout at them or find other ways of showing contempt or insult? Being aggressive or passively aggressive? How many times do you do that to strangers? I mean, they really would have had to do a terrible, awful thing for you to express contempt or hostility or anger toward them. And yet, on average, we do it so much more often. Again, not always, not everyone, but so many people do it so often with people close to them, whether it's family members, whether it's very close friends, whether it's romantic partners. No justification for that. Yes, it is also because we're more intimate with them, because we feel more comfortable with them. But why? Why treat others better than we treat the people we love most? Or why treat the people we love most worse than we would treat others? There is no justification. There can be conflict, there will be conflicts, and it is important. The question is, how do you keep it on the cognitive, behavioral level rather than the affective, emotional contempt level? And that can make all the difference. Essentially, what we're talking about here when it comes to romantic relationship is cultivating a deep, meaningful friendship. John Gottman: at the heart of my program is the simple truth that happy marriages are based on a deep friendship. By this I mean a mutual respect for and enjoyment of each other's company. These couples tend to know each other intimately. They are well versed in each other's likes, dislikes, personality, quirks, hopes, and dreams. They have an abiding regard for each other and express this fondness not just in the big ways, but in the little ways, day in and day out. Love is in the details. It's about knowing the little things, the big things. It is about sharing and being known. That's what a healthy relationship is, and that's how you can sustain passion in a relationship over years, and that's how you can continue to enjoy a passionate sexual relationship, even though physiologically, maybe initially, the natural inclination would be toward novelty, toward the exotic is erotic. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be that way as well, and that's natural, and that can be part of the fantasies that you share. But ultimately, for the long-term relationship, passionate relationship, to be known rather than to be validated. Finally, the fourth component of a healthy relationship, and I'll just touch on it now and we'll finish it up next week: positive perception. In a relationship, a healthy relationship, the partners have to be benefit finders. They have to appreciate one another. Because remember, if we don't appreciate, the good depreciates. If we don't appreciate what is working in a relationship past the honeymoon phase, the relationship will enter a downward spiral. And unfortunately, that happens to most relationships because we begin to take it for granted. And if we take for granted a relationship, it withers and dies. If we take for granted our own potential, that potential withers and dies. So benefit finding is important in a relationship. To focus on the discipline of my partner rather than on the rigidity. To focus on their sense of humor rather than look at it as frivolous. Focusing on the good, focusing on what works, and that is then accentuated. However, successful, thriving couples take this a step further. They're not just benefit finders. They have what Sandra Murray calls positive illusions. In other words, they think of their partner more than other people think of them. So the experiment that Sandra Murray did was the following. She asked couples to evaluate one another's strength. And then she asked other people who are close to these two partners to evaluate their strength. And what she found was that couples who evaluated accurately, meaning they evaluated their partner in the same way as others, friends, family members, evaluated them, they were okay. They were okay together. Couples who evaluated one another's strength on a lower level, meaning they didn't evaluate them as good, as strong, as powerful, as virtuous, or whatever it was, as other people did, whether it's family or friends, these relationships did not last for long on average. Couples who evaluated each other at a higher level, meaning as better than friends evaluated them, as better than family evaluated them, these couples' relationships were most likely to thrive and succeed over time. And Sandra Murray called it, because they were not connected to the evaluation of other people, Sandra Murray called it positive illusions. Now, or another term used, Brian Little uses this term, having an illusory glow about them, seeing them as better than supposedly they really are. Now, I agree partially with Sandra Murray. I agree with her that it is important to have these high, more positive evaluations. The one thing I disagree with Murray is on the use of the word illusion, because I don't think that is an illusion. In fact, it is very real. It is very real because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And here I'm introducing a new term in addition to benefit finding, benefit creating. Seeing things that were not there or that other people have not seen and then making it real. I mean, think about it in another domain. Was Marva Collins detached? Did Marva Collins have positive illusions about her students? Not at all. I would argue that the other teachers were detached because they didn't see that potential in their students. Marva Collins was very much connected, and she focused on the positive and created the benefits. Abraham Maslow, not only does love perceive potentialities, but it also actualizes them. Let me tell you a quick story about Tommy. And as I mentioned to you, Tommy is the consummate merit finder. In fact, she's a merit creator. So this was at a time when Tommy was 8 months pregnant. Huge baby. Those of you who know David, he's a very big baby. You know, like father, like son. So this is 8 months pregnant, and Tommy takes me for one of those talks that those of you in long-term relationships know about. And she says, Tal, you know, this is getting really heavy. This is really difficult for me, and I just need your help more. You just need to help me a little bit more in the house. And I said to her, fine. I felt so sheepish and so inconsiderate. I said, no, I'm sorry, fine. So what can I do? And she said, you know, shopping this afternoon would help. I just can't carry these bags anymore. So I went over to Star Market, filled up the entire refrigerator, not only brought the things home, but actually put them in the refrigerator. And because I felt so guilty. And then Tommy saw that, and she said, you know, thank you so much for doing it. and I said to Tammy, Tammy, I'm really sorry that you had to tell me. I should have done it without you. She said, no, 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 no. This is what I love about you so much. You're so considerate, and you listen to me when I talk. So I did the dishes too. Again, benefit creating rather than only benefit finding or focusing on what doesn't work. I will not see you on Tuesday. I'm away almost for the whole week of Passover, but you're going to have a treat on Tuesday with an amazing lecture by Sean on humor. I'll see you.